So let's see how far we can get today in our slow movement through Isaiah 41. This is not perhaps the main text, but this is one of the reasons that we chose, Stephen and I chose what is known as Second Isaiah. Some of you still had questions as to why we chose this section. First of all, it's recognized in modern scholarship as being a separate author, a different time, a different style, a different theology, different context in the first part of Isaiah. This particular set of units, most people would agree is called Second Isaiah. Some people feel that the section that comes afterward is also part of Second Isaiah. Others call it Third Isaiah. But we've chosen just this particular group of chapters and identifying it as a separate literary composition because of what it has to say to our days today, to our lives, and in particular in the framework of actively engaging, which is the name of this group, this study group, which began with the book of Acts, continues with the words of the prophets, is about trying to understand the other's religion. And there is, as I mentioned in one of the previous meetings, there is a rather large amount of Isaiah quotes from Isaiah, this section of Isaiah in New Testament literature. And maybe one of the famous, more famous is that of the suffering servant. And while I think we'll get deeper into that next week or next chapter, we begin to see that now. And what I wanted to, in the title, calling the servants of the Lord great and small, was to understand, just to talk a little bit about that word servant and where it comes from and what it might mean. And so just before we dive into the text, and again, I'm not sure today is any easier than last week or the week before. I and others were just wearier, we're more tired, we're worn down. We try to find positive acts in which to utilize our energy and our desire to help. In our particular situation, Sasha and I were taking care of one of our daughters, her partner, and her two little kids, 2 and 3, who've come to live with us from Israel for the time being. And I endeavor to speak whenever I have a chance, almost whenever I have a chance publicly. And created another one of those situations this afternoon, late this afternoon in Palm Springs at 5 o'clock, an interfaith gathering of a real interfaith gathering of Jews and Christians and a Buddhist priest who's a colleague of mine here in the area at the hospital, and Muslim woman from Corona, which is not so far away. And we hope to give a message of prayer, that we're all trying to deal with the suffering. My own brand of rabbinic thought and understanding is that this is not just, it's not a rally in support of Israel. It goes without saying that I personally am in support of the state of Israel and have given most of my life to that support, but there needs to be a significant place of compassion in our hearts for the other, and that is the non-combatants in the Gaza Strip right now, and other places. I imagine the West Bank, I'm guessing, is also suffering from that kind of violence. So lest we not forget, at the end, we say a prayer together, each of us in our own language, in our own style, that this study of people of all faiths together may help be a symbolic act in itself to bring about a peaceful resolution. Okay, so a word in Hebrew that will help us going forward. It's the Hebrew letters are Ayin Bet Dalid, Eved. or avad. And it's used in biblical Hebrew as a key word for worship. So the worship in the temple is avodah, is the noun that's made from that particular verb.
That you'll be able to speak, but at least you can.
An eved is someone who is a servant, but also a slave. Someone who is subservient to something, someone greater, and service. And hence we get this connection also between prayer service and why we use in English the word service, and in many other languages why service is used. It is a way of us showing that relationship that we have. We're coming to be part of something greater than us. Sometimes that's in violence, as in a slave, someone who's been enslaved, and sometimes that's out of love and respect and pure voluntary, as is the case when we are the servants of God. Now, what makes things a little bit complicated sometimes is that the word avodah also means work and things that are done, labor. And we see the connection. An eved, a servant or a slave, does avodah, does either work or worship. And I mentioned the way this trickling down. If we used a whiteboard, I would draw it out on the board visually. It trickles down because we're going to see phrases today that have to do with work, with artisans' crafts, with earth moving, with different kinds of things. And so I think my theme that I'd like to think about, I haven't delved into it deeply enough, but I was about to apologize. I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to apologize as to how much I haven't prepared the way I would like to be prepared for this. But what my thinking is that we look at all of what we're going to read today in the context of who is serving who, whom is serving who, whom is serving who, who is serving whom. Okay, Steve, did you have an introduction to this chapter that you'd like to bless us with at this point?
Yeah, maybe. I think, well, first of all, David, in your opening thoughts, did I hear that you and Sasha lived in Gaza for a period of time?
Yes, we did. I moved to Israel when I was 18 to study in the yeshiva and go to a yeshiva army program. It wasn't the yeshiva that gave ordination for the rabbinate. It was if you stayed there for a long amount of time, but the regular amount of time of 5 years was a very conventional for people that grew up like me, or the last part of high school, in the religious Zionist movement, especially the youth movement of Bnei Akiva. And the goal of Americans was to go there for a year or two and study in yeshiva and then come back to university. My goal, since I had been to Israel in 10th grade and I had always took things to the extreme, was to move to Israel, and got a one-way ticket already, and not even a round-trip ticket, in July of 1975. I did the 5 years at Kerem B'Yavne. Interesting, it's a place that's named after a center of the rabbis before they moved to the Galil. And so some of you may have heard that name before, Yavne. And as soon as I finished, I wanted to be a farmer. I looked around for farming communities and found that the only opportunity there was to be involved in the establishment of a farming community, a communal farming community, not a kibbutz, but what we call a moshav shitufi, a co-op moshav, co-op farming community, was in the Gaza Strip. I knew some people that were forming this group, and I came along as a bachelor. And the spot was in the Gaza Strip in a place called Netzarim, which was about a kilometer or so south of the city of Gaza. So things are very different now. There's far more population now than there was in 1980 when this was happening. It was less crowded. It wasn't crowded at all. Where we were living, there was quite a bit of farmland. We were farming on sand. We were doing sand farming, and we began the moshav, the community, in an army base, which was part of an old Israeli doctrine of putting army base / farming communities, soldiers who were farmers, in border areas. It's called Nachal. And the doctrine said eventually it should be taken over by civilians and turned into a permanent settlement. That's part of the story of Zionism and the settlement in the land. I used the little s settlement before settlement got a different meaning in when Israel occupied the West Bank and Gaza. I went down there. It wouldn't have been my first choice. I would have rather have been in the northern part of the country where there was no debate as to whether this was going to stay into Israel. I remember my father Reuben of blessed memory, saying, I wish you wouldn't go there. Not because it was dangerous, and it was more dangerous than living in other parts of Israel. There were already terrorist cells then that were active, and we had barbed wire, and we had guard duty every night. But I wish you wouldn't go there, because eventually Israel is going to give it back, and you're going to be so devastated that you're going to leave Israel. Now, in a way, his words were prophetic, but didn't really happen in that order exactly. We were there for 2 years. I thought that we were living in a way that was respectful to the local population. That's where my head was at the time. Of course, looking back, it's a colonial way of thinking. Treating the natives, so to speak, kindly. It was never, I never yelled. We became angry we had lots of Bedouin workers who were with us. We were invited into their home. We did things, I will say that we didn't invite them into our homes. I think that was not considered to be allowable. I'll say that Sasha and I were probably the most liberal politically of anybody who was down there at the time. But after a 2-year period, and we got married there a year after I moved there, after a 2-year period, it was no longer the idyllic kind of communal setting that we were looking for. And Sasha was making a great sacrifice for that year, spending the whole week in Jerusalem and coming down to be together the first year of our marriage just on the weekend. She was in nursing school, and so we decided for her to do her final year of nursing school in Jerusalem, where she was doing it, and we would move there just for the year. And that year, we would take some time and look for another farming community. Instead, that year turned in 1 year of academic study turned into 11 years of academic study, and the story changed quite a bit. And part of the story changing was, and I'll encapsulate it in this. I know this isn't Isaiah, but it's something I've written very little in my life. I've actually written a little bit about this. I have to dig it up and see where it is. I can remember waiting for Sasha when my parents bought us a new car. Both of us had what's called immigrants' rights to buy certain things in the first few years after immigration without tax. That was to encourage people from abroad to immigrate to Israel. And although I didn't use them in most cases because I felt that my parents were more well-to-do than most of the parents of my friends in Israel, and I can afford to buy, washing machines and things. Whatever we did, we bought at the regular rate. But my parents said, "Listen, you should have a car, and we'll buy it." And I wasn't about to say, "Well, we should pay literally 3 times more." It would have been 3 times more. It was a third the price without the tax. And my parents bought us a Ford Escort for $6,300, relatively cheap. It was new, but it's cheap because it was assembled in Israel. And I went to pick up Sasha at the local junction, which was about, I don't know, half a mile from where the Moshav was, because that's where the bus went to. And I waited there with my handgun handy on my lap, because we were told to live that way, to be careful. And I'm waiting, and I see a group of 7 or 8 Palestinian men walk by and looking at me. And I could so easily see the hatred in their eyes. And I'm saying to myself, here I am, they're walking, they barely get by, and I'm sitting in a new car. Now, I see this differently today as I did when I was 22 years old when this happened, or 23, 24. And I remember saying to myself, it's a good thing we, meaning us and my community, we believe in Mashiach, that Messiah is going to come and fix things for us. Because there's no way in hell we're ever going to work this out on our own. I know it's not, I'm not projecting backwards. I know exactly, I shared it with Sasha at the time. I know exactly that I said that. And it wasn't a year later that I was at Hebrew University in the Bible department and suddenly introduced to critical study of not just the Hebrew Bible, but also to religion in general, and eventually to Zionism, critical look at Zionism itself, that I realized that Mashiach was one of the most dangerous ideas in the Jewish tradition. Dangerous because, and for those that aren't familiar, Mashiach, Messiah, the anointed one, in the classical Jewish tradition based on prophetic works, but developed in Talmudic Judaism and afterwards in medieval thinkers, Jewish thinkers, is a king of flesh and blood from the house of David, who will come, I would imagine, charismatic, but very, very skillfully lead the people of Israel in battle against their enemies. And the eventual outcome will be that all peoples of the earth will accept that God is one. Different versions of what happens after that. Does that mean that the laws of the Torah are for everybody? Does that mean that just the Jews will keep the laws of the Torah, but the non-Jews will keep the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah, of the children of Noah? There's not a lot of agreement upon exactly what happens. But what does happen, though, and this was what was dangerous and still is dangerous, is that we think somebody else is going to come and solve our problems for us. And it was from that moment on, the minute, I mean, one of the next courses I had was in the history of Jewish liturgy. And I saw how what is sacrosanct to an Orthodox young man is what the prayer book looks like, is piece by piece is assembled from different places over centuries and really only got its final status when the printing press was invented. Because before that, manuscripts and oral traditions were far more variant than what happened after the printing press. And from that moment on, I took all mention of Mashiach out of my prayer. Because Mashiach waiting for somebody else. Magdalena, are we all right? I'm getting all sorts of notices here. All right, assuming people can still hear me. Mashiach is the most dangerous, still is, in my opinion. And when people call certain Israelis messianic, what they mean in Israel is not that they are believers in Jesus. That Messianic Jews, that's what it means here in North America. Messianic Israelis, Messianic Zionists are those that think that all we need to do is to keep God's laws in the way that has been passed down in the Orthodox tradition and show that we are worthy by taking and holding as much land of ancient land of Israel possible. And this brings us to politics and who's responsible, and I'm not ready to go there right now. But that is my lesson of living in Gaza Strip for 2 years, 2 full years. Now, people will ask me, and they have before, especially in interviews, journalists, do I regret living in Gaza? And I think my first instinct is to say, no, I don't regret it, because it gave me a fuller sense of who we are and what we became as occupiers. Better than so many other people, certainly better than most American Jews who I talk with. That's why it's so difficult. It's so difficult to talk with. I think it gave me a richer compassion for street scenes that I see on the news, for faces of people who I remember their names, I have no idea what became of them. I also don't regret it because it taught me a greater lesson in how to understand my Judaism and how to understand politics. So no, I don't regret. I do regret that I was part of an overall colonial effort in the state of Israel in occupying that territory. And for those 2 years, supporting and making, I mean, we did well. We did very well. Lots of money came into state of Israel and to our Moshav because we had some very, very knowledgeable farmers who were in this group of people. I didn't know, they told me what to do, but I knew nothing. I learned anything about farming I knew. And so we helped the state of Israel at the time. We helped that idea of Israel. And I regret that that's the direction that Israel went, but not that I was there. And you'd have to hear from Sasha. She's not here today. She's with our kids. You'd have to hear what she has to say.
David, thanks so much for that and for taking it deeper inside, not only of your life, but of kind of the heart of where we are right now. And apropos of your opening recognition of the need for compassion of the other, my dear friend Tom Bonnell, who is online today. Tom, are you? I don't see Tom.
He had been at some point. He's not here right now.
Okay, so he wrote a prayer, a collect that he asked if I would read it for the group. Can I do that?
Of course, please.
O Lord, God of our ancestors, blessed is your name. We pray that shalom, which passes all understanding, may fill the hearts of Israelis and Palestinians. May they behold each other as your children and turn their swords into plowshares. We particularly pray for those who will lead your people in the way of peace, and especially our brother David and the community of Or Hamidbar. May your spirit guide him and them and comfort them in this time of pain. Amen.
Amen.
And then you asked if I had any context before we dive into 41. And last night I was at Rabbi Neil Blumoff is in Austin, and he's a conservative pastor and rabbi of Agudas Akin. And he does this mostly monthly jazz event at the Cactus Cafe. And last night it was packed house, and it was Dexter Gordon and the Art of Exile. And so Neil got deep into his own feeling of exile, but also suggested that through the music, through the most amazing musicians that he assembles each month, that we would find a homeland in that time and space. And then at one point near the end, he read Psalm 137 in its entirety. And I thought it was a powerful word. And it's an interfaith gathering at the Cactus, I would say, as well. And so I think Psalm 137, it not only is precisely the context for the exiles in Babylon that we're getting to know through Isaiah, second Isaiah, because they are exiles. And while second Isaiah 40 to 55 addresses the hope and that a new exodus is about to happen, and speaking of Messiah, Cyrus becomes the one, but it's clear that this is God's appointment, that the nations are as nothing. And we'll get into that today, but the grief, the loss of everything in those 50 years from 586 to 536. And I don't know, maybe we're talking 540 in second Isaiah. We know this was penned in that period. So that's the setting of Psalm 137. So I'd like to read it. It's not too long. But it encompasses, and this is what Rabbi Blumoff did so well, both the grief, the tragedy, but also the anger and the desire for revenge. And I think that is, as we have heard over and over again, Israel clearly has a right to defend itself. But then there's also this warning about tapping the brakes, and don't do what we ended up doing after 9/11 is what I'm hearing more and more of. And so Psalm 137 gets that anger and that desire for revenge. And then to go right into 42 of Isaiah, I think it completes that circle and brings us back into a place of compassion and moving into a new place. Okay. David, your screen sharing, were you going to
Yeah,
post
I'm
one?
sorry. I'm looking for, I don't know why it's not coming up.
Well, I'll just read it. By the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept when we remembered you, O Zion. As for our harps, we hung them up on the trees in the midst of that land. For those who led us away captive asked us for a song, and our oppressors called for mirth. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song upon an alien soil? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember the day of Jerusalem, O Lord, against the people of Edom, who said, down with it, even to the ground. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy the one who pays you back for what you have done to us. Happy shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. So that Isaiah, yes, we have that first layer set in that historical context in the 6th century before the Common Era, but it also speaks with relevance, I think, at a second level to us today. And as I have been steeped in Isaiah over the last couple of months, prepping for this group and my Friday morning group, I'm just struck anew by, how beautiful and how terrible the pathos of God is, and to have sympathy for that, like Isaiah, and yet also to know God's love for the nations, even though the nations are at war. And so that vision of harmony coupled with that anger, it's like a symphonic thread that weaves through these texts. And again, the perspective that we were given in this particular section is one of kind of a universalism, a broad overview of all the nations, with Yahweh as the gods are nothing compared to Yahweh, and Yahweh's heart is compassion and mercy and yearning for all, to yearning for the lamb and the lion to lay down together. So that's the context I would like to present, David.
Okay, then. So why don't we get to the text? We're in Isaiah 41. Wayne Sinclair, would you like to read for us today from 1 to 7?
Certainly. Stand silent before me, coastlands, and let nations renew their strength. Let them approach to state their case. Let us come forward together for argument. Who has roused a victor from the east, summoned him to God's service, has delivered up nations to him, and trodden sovereigns down, has rendered their swords like dust, their bows like wind-driven straw. He pursues them, he goes on unscathed. No shackle is placed on his feet. Who has wrought and achieved this? The one who announced the generations from the start. I, God, who was first and will be with the last as well. The coastlands look on in fear. The ends of the earth tremble. The craftsmen draw near and come. Each one helps the other, saying to his fellow, take courage. The woodworker encourages the smith who flattens with the hammer, encourages him who pounds the anvil. He says of the riveting, it is good, and he fixes it with nails that they may not topple.
Reactions?
I noticed that the prophet Isaiah speaks in the chapter from last week, Isaiah 40. Here, the Lord, Yahweh, is speaking, and it's in the first person. So I think that's interesting.
This is often referred to as a mock trial, this particular section. To me, again, how can we're not studying in a vacuum. It feels like, the world is in judgment right now of who's more right than the other, who's suffering more than the other. The coastlands, from the standpoint of somebody writing in the land of Israel, in Hebrew it says iyim, translated here as coastlands. An e in later Hebrew became an island. Here it coastlands probably means that it's like peninsulas. It's the same word in Hebrew, but this idea that that there's this beyond. It's not just us who are here right now. There's this beyond, and there's mega movement going on. I see that in the second paragraph as well. And I see the fear. The coastlands look on in fear. And the trembling is, this is not just right now. Today is not just Israelis and Hamas, or the IDF and Hamas. It's Israelis and it's Gazans, and it's all Palestinians, and it's not just Israelis and Palestinians. It's Hezbollah in the north, and it's Iran, and it's Russia's involved, and all the things that you hear, it's all interconnected. And yet, there's that last paragraph that for me gives me this glimpse of hope, of cooperative effort. Different workmen, different workers, different craftspeople doing things. And they're all kind of working together so that in the end, it may not topple. Don.
Stephen, could you say a little bit more about God speaking in the first person? What is the significance of that? And kind of a dialogue here that I'm not sure to whom that first person is addressing.
I'm not sure I have an answer to that, Don, other than I do think it's a singular thing, more so in Isaiah than some of the other prophets, who might speak on behalf of God in the third person, but here we get this directness, which I think is.
So in prior prophetic books, I'll use a loose term, but the prophet is God's mouthpiece. Here, God speaking in the singular voice is just like God is speaking to Moses.
I mean, that literally, that's what seems to be on the page.
Don, you asked to whom he's speaking, that becomes clear in the next line that we haven't read yet.
Okay, sorry.
To Israel, yeah. Harold, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, who is a victor from the East? My impression is when I read this, who has roused a victor from the East? He was referring to a specific person.
Yeah, usually it's assumed that it's Cyrus of Persia. Right, again, this is part of the late dating of this part of Isaiah, this section Isaiah that we're studying of second Isaiah.
Cyrus of Persia would be around 537 BCE. So that means this is kind of around in the same time frame. No?
Yeah, or at least at least after that, right? It can't be before that.
Yeah. Okay. Can I also make a comment on this? Isaiah 1, the tone is very different. I'm just reading this for the first time. Isaiah, the first part of Isaiah versus the second part of Isaiah. I agree, it does seem to be a different voice, different person writing it. Very different.
And Ajit, most scholars would place that first Isaiah, let's call it chapters 1 to 39, in that time, as the Assyrian Empire is on the verge of destroying Samaria. And
Northern Kingdom, yeah.
Northern Kingdom, yeah. 200 years earlier than this.
722 BCE.
Right. And also historically, Cyrus has begun to coalesce. He defeats certain smaller groups, and he amasses power, and the writings on the wall that he's coming for Babylon. And just the way that unfolds historically is an adventure story in its own right. And how all those coalitions come together to make that happen.
And just to make sure everybody knows the historical context, it is Cyrus who's going to, it's called Cyrus's declaration. That's an interesting thing. He's going to make a statement, a policy which will enable people who had been exiled to go back to their homelands, which makes it possible for the return of the exiles to come back to the land of Judah. An interesting thing I learned when I was at university is that only after the historical Balfour Declaration, for those that are familiar, that it was an important step in the founding of the state of Israel, by Lord Balfour, did scholars begin to call this, not this, but in the section of the Bible that has Cyrus saying that the people can go back, the Cyrus Declaration. It's how modern history influenced backwards on how you call things. Apparently, those words, the Declaration of Cyrus, weren't used until after, whenever it was in the 1920s or whenever it was, the Balfour Declaration.
17.
Anything else, folks?
Well, it appears that Cyrus then becomes one of the servants of the Lord, even though he may not, have that consciousness.
Yeah, I think that for me, that last paragraph with the different craftsmen working, that was my introduction about avodah, the work that's going on. There a lot of different. There's a lot of working and worship and serving going on. It all in this. It's all kind of in this collage. But yeah. Cyrus becomes that particular servant. But then we go on to the next section, unless somebody has anything else to say about this first section. Okay, Frank, would you like to read for us today? 8 to 13.
I would. I arrived late from a doctor's appointment. I haven't printed out the sheet
Oh.
yet. I'm just looking at my RSV. So, ask me
That's
later.
fine. You can go read. You can go ahead and read from that. That's fine.
What verse?
We're chapter 41, verses 8 through 13.
All righty. But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its furthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant. I have chosen you and not cast you off. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand.
Keep going, please.
Oh, behold, all who are incensed against you shall be put to shame and confounded. Those who strive against you shall be as nothing and shall perish. You shall seek those who contend with you, but you shall not find them. Those who war against you shall be as nothing at all. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, fear not, I will help you.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
That line that says, they who strive with you shall become as naught and shall perish. Is that correct? Because they're working with you, why would they perish if they were striving with you?
I think strive from the word strife, struggle.
Ah, okay. So I'm reading it differently. All right.
I love calling upon or bringing Abraham in, who was called out just as they're being called out, and was blessed to be a blessing to all the nations. And so that theme, that thread is woven into here with that same universal reach.
Right. So that's an interesting point that because the next section it's going to be more specific, but in a rather strange way, using Jacob, which is less universal, right? But the seed of Abraham, that's a good point. Again, that a little bit fades into my overarching kind of feeling about this chapter, that everybody has a part to play here. Everybody has a part to play, and you can choose to be with the good folks, or you can choose to be not with the good folks, and it's not a genealogical thing, I think.
Sweet. That should be it.
Yeah, there's a lot of play on words, in aside from the word eved, which appears here in many different forms that I mentioned in the beginning, that is to serve or to work or to worship. There's also quite a bit of the word fear. Fear and seed are written with the same consonants in Hebrew language. They're not connected to each other, but because of various grammatical words, they appear very often in the same consonants. You only know how to read it either from the context or from the way it's been vocalized. And the vocalization, that is the dots in the Hebrew text, we don't have any, there's nothing vocalized from before medieval manuscripts. But that seems to be, and sometimes they're used on purpose together as the same keyword, seeing and fearing. But there's a lot of fear involved here. And And there's another key word here is helping. We had it in the previous section, each one helps the other, and here I will be your help. Anything else? Tom, I see you're with us now. Thank you for the prayer that you wrote and that Stephen read beforehand.
Baruch Hashem.
Thanks. Julia, would you like to read the next section?
Oh, yes. Fear not, O worm Jacob, O men of Israel. I will help you, declares God. I, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. I will make of you a threshing board, a new thresher with many spikes. You shall thresh mountains to dust and make hills like chaff. You shall winnow them, and the wind shall carry them off. The whirlwind shall scatter them, but you shall rejoice in God and glory in the Holy One of Israel.
Are people silent because they don't know what to say or because they don't want to say it out loud?
Well, it seems like there's a lot of agricultural references in this section.
Ecological transformation, as one of the commentators likes to say. That was hinted at already in the first chapter as well, an ecological transformation. But Don, would you also say there's a little bit of anger showing through here?
Yeah,
And revenge?
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to be on the other side of that.
I'm worried about Jacob being called a worm.
Right. Okay. So you want to go back. So that's a bit of a conundrum, I think. First of all, you should know in the ancient translations, the Septuagint, and in the Targum, the Aramaic translations, it's translated like families of the house of Israel. They didn't translate it as worm and what's the other word that's used here sometimes. So, many people feel that the text should be a parallel, worm and maggot. The worm means, it's like when you translate from one language to another today, not everything is always complimentary, whereas it might be innocent or have a totally different meaning. It could very well be that worm here means weak and not rotten, not something negative, so to speak, but weak in need of help. That's the best comment. That's the best interpretation that I've seen, that I saw. I don't know, Steve, if you saw anything else, but
well, I think especially that's true. I read it that way, more like humility, the worm on the earth. And then when you get that contrasting image of the threshing, it's not of people, it's the threshing of the mountains, which are always seen high and mighty, the proud mountains. So for me, it's a contrasting image, and also fits chapter 40 of clearing the way for the highway for the Exodus back home. Yeah.
Don?
The thought that I had is that the threshing board is just the part of the final product of the bread. It's not the end product. So there's something else that's going to happen after the threshing board is used.
Well, it's a winnowing down of the people and leaving the chosen ones. This is, I'm frank with everybody here. It's uncomfortable for me to read this. I don't suggest ever ignoring passages like this, but it's passages like this that I believe fuel much of Jewish messianism as well when it comes to the political situation. I'm sorry, I can't escape it. To me, when I'm thinking of this clearing the ground, I'm thinking of certain shots on CNN. I mean, I don't see them as much on Israeli TV. I kind of stopped watching for a while Israeli TV, but yeah, and here it is, Stephen. Here it is specific. It's Jacob, right? This is no less universal. But maybe that's why it's so important to hold on to that contrast of, after all, but don't let it go to your head. You're a worm. You're a maggot. Yeah. I don't know, some strange stuff. Anybody else? Come now. People must have some thoughts here.
That really, David, that really goes against, and maybe it's a good thing. I mean, that really goes against sort of our, self-esteem and feeling good about ourselves. And maggots, I mean, probably is a useful corrective to where we are. In the Greco-Roman world, this is what you wanted to be. In the Metropolitan Museum, there's this amazing statue of really just a ruler. It wasn't Augustus. It's huge. And this really cuts through that you can't see yourself as huge. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Rabbi, if we could use the term lowly instead of worm, it relates very well to the earlier term of servant, abd, that you were using. So in this context, as I listen to this conversation, I'm more likely to lean towards the term lowly instead of.
That would be a good translation, I think, if based on what we've talked about.
Yeah.
Stephen, I thought your hand was up, was it?
Yeah, I was just commenting on the part that it's like God is on our side kind of thing, which as opposed to this being, affairs between people, it's like, no, God is on our side and not your side, which I even see, in some of these professional sports players where they think God had some sort of claim into the outcome of some sporting event. This just seems like the same kind of thing. I don't know that. I just don't feel that God takes that particular interest. When there's wars between people, it's between people, and God's not on any particular side.
Except the Astros.
Thank you, Stephen.
This-
Go ahead. All right, Terry, would you like to read 1720 for us?
The poor and the needy seek water, and there is none. Their tongue is parched with thirst. I, God, will respond to them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open up streams on the bare hills and fountains amid the valleys. I will turn the desert into ponds, the arid land into springs of water. I will plant cedars in the wilderness, acacias and myrtles and oleasters. I will set cypresses in the desert, box trees and elms as well, that all may see and know, consider and comprehend that God's hand has done this, that the Holy One of Israel has wrought it.
Yeah.
Those who were raised on in Zionist educational settings, which were most of us in North America, I think, perhaps hear a little bit about the inspiration and the words that were used by the Jewish National Fund to plant forests and making the desert bloom. This very inspirational and a rather unique section of 7 different trees. We don't know exactly that these are the translations. 2 of them we're sure about, but of course that doesn't matter. This is a rare example of a botanical kind of lesson here, beginning with the issue of water. Let's not forget that in the previous chapter, the whole process was compared to Yetziat Mitzrayim, to the Exodus from Egypt and the wandering in the wilderness, wandering in the desert. And let's not forget how central water was to the narrative, to the wilderness narratives. And while the text is speaking towards Israel, Israel's still the subject or the object, whatever, the addressee here is the topic. For me, this would be, this is a prayer into itself. Somebody said to me, a fellow colleague called me from time to time, and we talk about his sermons mostly because I don't do the classical sermon thing really. And he went on at some point about how the Gaza Strip has so much potential to become this place of vacationing for a Mediterranean beautiful, if they would only aim their resources in the right direction. Of course, that's way oversimplification. I can't accept it, but that is a kind of a fantasy. Wouldn't it be nice if that beautiful area where there's sand dunes and was proper and water desalination was perfected, and all the things that we thought we were part of in 1980 as Israelis, and creating a kind of a Garden of Eden there. And yes, there was a center, tourism center, not exactly where I was living. We were more agricultural. Yeah, but this would be, for me, this would be part of my prayer. My prayer for what could be in the Gaza Strip. At the same time, I recognize just how complex and how complicated that is.
And I'd like to add to that by also responding to Stephen's earlier comment about God taking sides. I think Isaiah is remarkable in part for me because of that symphonic thread that weaves really from the beginning of first Isaiah all the way through, especially in chapters 1 to 39. But it's that theme of, at the end of the day, I don't really care about how many lambs you're putting on the altar. The smell of incense has made me nauseous. I just want you to take care of each other. I want you to tend to your orphans, tend to your widows, reach out to the oppressed. Then I may pay attention to what you're sacrificing. So that theme is very prominent. And Israel's not exempt. None of the nations are exempt from that.
Great, thank you. Eileen, you want to read for us 21, 24?
David?
Yes.
I just had one thing where at the beginning, and I think this relates to what Stephen just said, maybe about taking care, God wants us to take care of each other. It's the first few lines. The poor and needy seek water, there's none. And I, God, will respond to them. I will not forsake them. So somebody reading that might then say, oh, I don't have to do anything. God's going to take care of it. But whereas, in fact, kind of the opposite is demanded, I think, of at least my understanding of Judaism. Anyway, just.
Harold knows that when we pray in Or Hamidbar, it's we actually never ask God to do something for us. We ask God, and I would imagine this is common to many people here in this group. We ask God to help support us in doing that work as God's partners. And Sid, you wanted to say something, but just unmute first, I think.
Oh, I was going to say, why do we need God to tell us to take care of our needy and our sick?
Because as human beings, we haven't really done a good job over the last many millions of years. We've kind of failed the test, haven't we, Sid?
We sure have. Yes.
Okay. I'd asked somebody to read. I forgot who it was. Eileen, I think 21, 24.
Submit your case, says God. Offer your pleas, says the God of Jacob. Let them approach and tell us what will happen. Tell us what has occurred, and we will take note of it. or announce to us what will occur, that we may know the outcome. Foretell what is yet to happen, that we may know that you are God's. Do anything, good or bad, that we may be awed and see. Why, you are less than nothing. Your effect is less than nullity. One who chooses you is an abomination. Oh,
A little confusing, yes.
where did that
Mhm.
come from?
So this is back to what I said as a mock trial. This chapter is known as a mock trial, and this is you know, tell us what, okay, this is up until now, God, this is what I think should happen. Okay, so what do you folks think should happen? How are you going to get us out of this? That's how I understand this.
And there is some mocking, actual mocking
Right.
of the nation, the gods of the nations. And let's see what you got. Bring it. Good luck.
How about I am less than nothing? That's rough. I think that's pretty rough. And I'm troubled by that. It reminds me a little bit of the end of the book of Job, where Job is lamenting and complaining, and God essentially says, who do you think you are? Did you make all these things? So it's but this is, this really, I mean, as I said before, I think this flies in the face of our modern self-confidence and hubris, really.
Can I
Go
read what the note of my Bible it says these verses? The Lord argues against the gods and their believers, asking them to step forward and announce what great acts they have committed or what predictions they have successfully made. So if this is a mock trial and it is being addressed to false gods or other gods, God is turning the cannons against these other gods to point out how sterile they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. These are words that are not they're not directed to Israel, they're directed to the enemy, and they're said in the context of Israel. And therefore, in the ancient views of what is considered to be comfort, this is comfort that God would go to bat for us in this way. But it does bring up a really good point, Tom, and that's something that I find myself. I still keep looking at social media because I'm addicted like others. I want to know what other colleagues are writing. My feed is almost 98% clean of things that would frame Israel as the demon. But what I'm feeling here is that, when I see a post that says, you absolutely must condemn what Hamas did, there is no but. And while I agree, but is a difficult world, but there's and. What am I saying? Is that many people on my side, Israeli, the normative Jewish community, not all, but the vast majority of the Jewish leadership in this country is saying, has too much of a tendency to say to the Palestinians, you are less than nothing. I am personally willing to say to Hamas that they're less than nothing, they're worse than less than nothing. That's a place where I'm at to say. But I really need to make that distinction. And all the other talk of, well, the Palestinians let this happen, or look how Arab countries have not come to the rescue of their own brothers and sisters who are all those things, to me, put the words of you are less than nothing in my mouth. And so I want to be careful. I don't know if this was the direction you were going, Tom, probably not, but that's where that particular phrase takes me. I want to make it clear also that everything that I've said in this last hour, I think it is clear to people, is that there is no justification whatsoever. There is, however, an obligation to atrocities that are happening. There is an obligation, though, to take a step back and take in the larger picture, as I have been saying time and time and again, that to my mind, real leadership today takes nuance. It's about nuance. So why don't, I'm sorry to cut it short, but we're late already. Let's just read the last section, if you would. Megan, you want to read 25 to 29?
I have roused him from the north, and he has come from the sunrise, one who invokes my name, and he has trampled rulers like mud, like a potter treading clay, who foretold this from the start, that we may note it. From aforetime, that we might say, you are right. No one foretold, no one announced, no one has heard your utterance. The things once predicted to Zion, behold, here they are. And again I send a herald to Jerusalem. But look, there is no one. No one of them can predict or can respond when I question them. See, they are all nothingness. Their works are nullity. Their statutes are naught and nil.
I think this brings us back to the beginning of Cyrus, of Koresh, the help coming from the north. But what I am most fascinating, but what I would love to learn more about, and Stephen Kinney or to others who are experts, is how is this particular passage, if it is understood in the context of Christianity. And we may have to wait until next week. Next week we will arrive at the quote from Matthew, maybe in the other Gospels. I know it from Matthew about the suffering servant. So any parting gifts of words, Stephen, Kenny?
Just again that there was, it's part of the comfort, right? Is Marduk or the gods or the Mesopotamian gods greater than Yahweh? Why are we the ones who are brought to nothing? And so this this reassurance or this revisioning of the remnant and their role as a servant to continue being a blessing to the nations is what this is all about. Along the way, much like Tom said at the end of Job, it's like it puts it in perspective. You who think you're all that, it's you don't have as much power as you think you might have. And so be humble, be careful. Hubris leads to violence real quickly.
And perhaps I should have entitled this page today, Be a Worm. I interrupted somebody who was about to say something.
Go ahead.
It's interesting how this is very much with us in the conflict. Every time we go out into Manhattan, you can see Israelis and Palestinians protesting against each other. And it's there, it's there. I mean, you can see it, and it's present.
Yeah.
Ajit?
We were supposed to fly to Tel Aviv this previous Monday, Martha and I. So today I would have, if things had gone according to plan, been in Jerusalem. I'm really sad by what's going on. I'm really saddened by the loss of life, but I was really looking forward to spending 3 weeks in Israel. I'm really sad. But Delta gave me back all my money, so that's happy.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if I can put this up. Just a moment. putting in the chat box. Yes. Not that it helps those who are not living by, it actually says watch live here, but I don't think it's going to be live, that we're doing it in the church. I don't think we have a technician. So just know that later on today, we'll be gathering here, Muslims and Buddhists and Jews and Christians and other faiths at 5 o'clock our time. If you have a moment to incline your prayers in our direction, to recognize the pain, recognize the suffering, and to ask that God help us do those things that we don't do on our own, Sid, the things that we need to be told to do. I very much cherish this group, love all of you, and it's just so important in my own life, and I hope it is significant in yours as well, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.